The best way to start and to ask people to participate in the very beginning of this event is to take a floor and be louder than the people who are speaking while we are opening this session. Thank you so much. I'm really honored and privileged to be moderator of this panel, panel one, panel on equitable, inclusive, and effective global governance in the context of current challenges. David was teasing me after his excellent moderating the introductory panel. That was actually the best introduction to our panel, to the topic that we are having as well. And he told me that he wanted to be entertaining like I am when I moderate. I said, I want to be as serious as you are when I'm moderating. So I'll try to be as serious almost as David, having in mind that the topic is so important and having in mind that we have such a distinguished panelist in here. When I was sitting down there, Boris was asking me, what am I doing? Some accounting. And I was, in order to be coming here, I did some exercises just to get calm in the airplane. And I did accounting on what was happening in the last 35 years since Berlin Wall fell down until today in the global scene in sense of some economic parameters about growth of GDP, about comparison, how much it was given to defense, how much inequality was growing, and so on. And I ended with a very interesting accounting that the top richest, I made top 12. Why top 12 people in the world is because I made the sum of G7 plus G5. I call BRICS G5. So 12, those two groupings can be compared with 12 richest people in the world. And it's very interesting that this morning we saw that Biden was speaking yesterday, addressing his last farewell speech, and he was pointing of the one danger that the world can be run by some new force of oligarchs, force of rich people. And I just finished my accounting when Boris was asking me what I'm doing, and I realized that, believe it or not, when you take a top 12 people of the world in sense of their richness, 11 of them are coming from the United States. 11 of them. And when you take a richest top 12, you come to the impressive sum of about $2.5 trillion wealth. $2.2 billion wealth, which is about as much as spending for defense in the world today. That defense budget went in the last 25 years from about 1.2 trillion to 2.5 trillion. And that's how much these people are. So we live in a world in which that's G7 plus G5, could be G12, but what G is the real G today that is representing multilateral world? And I like the saying that someone smart has said, we're entering into G0 world. That actually there is no group of countries that can call themselves as being the running the show. So having said so we are in this event, among other things, preparing for Global Baku Forum. Global Baku Forum is our crown jewel every year in sense of events. And having said so, last year was really glorious year for NGIC, Madam President, and this was probably the most fruitful year for NGIC in sense of the content that we provided from ending with COP29. Of course, when we were with Secretary General in just last month, I think, last month in Portugal, we told him that we agreed that we will try, and he asked us to do something in our capacity to see how the Pact of the Future is going to be implemented. So one of the things that we are discussing and today, and they will be discussing next year, is how to give additional push for that turbocharger for SDGs, which is called Pact for the Future. And that's overall idea of our topic today. So without further notice, I would ask Madam President to give us introductory remarks for this very important panel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ladies and gentlemen, we have a very inspiring title to our session about equitable, inclusive, and effective global governance. And I do believe that all of you present here have participated in various activities and the implementation of these noble goals in the various capacities in which you serve or have served. What strikes me as I look at the news every day and examine the events in the world is that there are aspects of global governance or governance of particular countries that remind me of the days when I was a young clinical psychologist doing diagnoses of people with severe neurosis and difficulties in functioning. And I'd like to maybe point out to some psychological factors that play against us achieving the noble goals of, let's see them again, get them exactly, equitable, inclusive, and effective global governance. What is it that we see in the world? If somebody has nuclear weapons, in other words, they have force, they have the capacity to destroy, it seems to be accepted as almost a given that one has to accommodate them. One has to try to please them. One has to placate them, even if it should be done at the expense of somebody else. In fact, preferably at the expense of somebody else. And indeed, if we look to solutions to military conflicts or other situations of the kind, it seems accepted that large countries, possessors of nuclear weapons, can decide. We were planning to have meetings between, say, two heads of state who are going to decide the fate of a nation that meanwhile is being aggressed and destroyed, both physically and humanly. They are going to meet because they possess human resources, they possess nuclear weapons, they have very large countries and great economies. They are going to decide the fate of others. Now, that is not global governance, that is global tyranny. The other tyranny is what Zlatko mentioned, the tyranny of money. Increasingly, some countries are actually openly run by oligarchs. And if ancient Greece had a certain period where it was run by an oligarchy, now there's more than one country that is run by the power of money. And the concentration of money, the increasing size of the Gini index across the world is an extremely alarming trend, and it goes against what we would hope for global governance. If technological development, the progress of artificial intelligence, the new discoveries and scientific feats and technological achievements, if these serve only the same handful of people who already have a concentration of wealth in their hands, then the common good of their country at large or the world at large is not being served. And the third factor is fear. And there seems to be, it's become a tool of both at the national level and international level. You might say polytechnologists have discovered that working on people's fears and on their resentments and on their suspicions is a way of pushing buttons, as it were, to the weaknesses of human character. I remember as a young psychologist being faced with a patient who told me this. I asked her what was her most serious problem. She said, everywhere I go and everything I do, I meet up with people who make me angry. And I don't know what to do because, be it in my family, everybody is busy making me angry. And if I go outside and I meet other people and so on, everywhere I'm faced with people who make me angry. And the patient could not accept or realize that the anger that she was feeling was coming from inside herself. It was her own unhappiness about various events in her life and the way she interpreted them. She was projecting onto the world the feelings that she was carrying herself inside. I think that this is one of the most serious human weaknesses, this projection of anxiety, insecurity, doubt, fear, especially fear in front of the unknown and the fear of the future, uncertainty, resentment, jealousy, all negative emotions that humans are heir to. They are being worked, if you like, with special political technologies nowadays. Parties are being created on a flimsy basis of so little rationality as saying that vaccines not only do not protect you against contagious diseases, but on the contrary, they make you iller and so on. And whole parties have been created on the simple fact of denying vaccination. So in other words, in the political system, we now have movements that are based on irrationality, on irrational fears, and on affirmations and declarations that are absolutely invented, non-existent, and contrary to reality. So that, to sum up, I think that the way information is being treated in our modern world, the digitalization of public discourse is going to be a challenge for the future governance of countries everywhere. In those countries that achieve technological levels of electronic communication, I think the political scene is going to be completely changed, and the political processes will have to take into account the pernicious effect of disinformation, misinformation, and if you like, it's going to become part of hybrid warfare between countries in the most significant way. I hope my colleagues here have some positive solutions to these kind of problems that they might propose. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm not going to call now next one who's going to be more optimistic and give positive solutions. I'm going to call Amre Moussa because he's in my little line of order of speaking. So Amre, try to be more positive than we expect you to do so.
Thank you. I'll try to be positive as much as I can. Under such circumstances, first of all, as our co-chairman, co-chairperson, I must say, has mentioned now, that this is just a noble goal, but not a practical policy. I didn't find it a noble goal. I found it just a question mark. Can we really work together to achieve an equitable, inclusive, and effective global governance under such circumstances? That is one question. The other question, the second question is, and here I agree again with our co-chairperson, what do we mean by equitable, by inclusive, by effective global governance, if ever we want to achieve something of those goals? I see equitable as calling for taking into consideration the interests of all countries of the global South, and that the international system should not cater only to the interests of the global North. This is the interpretation to the term equitable. It has a lot of other things, definitely, but this reflects the feeling, the impression that the current system does not provide for equality. And therefore, we have to work to achieve that and to agree on the meaning of equitable, inclusive. I tend to propose a positive interpretation of this term, inclusive. I would say that all those who are going to be active in building up the road towards the future will have to include the international civil society. It should not be left to countries alone. International civil society should be welcomed, invited, sitting in the same room or rooms or halls that would discuss the future of this planet. As for effective, ladies and gentlemen, I believe that the reason why the current system is failing or has failed was the double standard in addressing problems, in dealing with situations. And we have seen that around the world in so many, and the examples are very clear. I have to address the way we should discuss this issue. And I call for the continuation, that we should continue discussing those problems, lack of equitable treatment of all countries and societies and peoples, and the issue of double standard that has destroyed the Security Council, destroyed the international security system, destroyed the international system itself. We have reached a point now where the international system has been sidelined. We have seen the international law being disregarded. We have seen that on the TV. We read the documents that has led to such a situation. Our chairperson referred to the nuclear power that could be used, and I refer to the lowest kind of consideration when genocide is being hidden, is being accepted, tolerated. The human rights, which were the flag. Why don't you run elections and the prisons and we have seen that killing, mass destruction has been tolerated, has been covered, has been even helped. There, we have also heard threats of the possible use of tactical nuclear weapons. And not in one place, not coming from one capital, more than one capital. So, if we really want to have equitable and effective system, we have to be straightforward. Not to again create a situation where just let us pass this difficult period and then come back to the same way of behaving and of planning a system. We, in our region at least, we have seen a lot of false smiles and promises that we have seen lies as the Webster dictionary explains, lies. Yes, we are going to do this. We promise you we will do this, but you just do this. And this thing will never be believed anymore. That is an additional difficulty in the international dealing with each other. So promises should not be taken for granted. At least in our case in the Middle East, if somebody tells us, but you go and normalize the relations with Israel, so the situation will just calm down. And therefore, the doors will be open for the two-state solution. We said, no, sorry, we don't accept this logic. This should not. Normalization should follow, not precede the building of peace in the Middle East. We, for your information, and you are all people that have seen and still playing roles, we, the Arab side, do not consider normalization as a taboo. In fact, we consider it a necessity, but at the right moment and with the right quid pro quo, not a gift, and not to please some big powers, just to normalize. This is the wrong attitude, and this would not create equitable or effective or inclusive governance. This will not do that. So I also call for being straightforward when we build or try to build a new system, a new international system. As governance itself, we have the United Nations. We have the Bretton Woods institutions. We have the treaties, conventions dealing with all kinds of problems that we are facing. We have COP29 at the end. I don't think that all this will work, because if international law has been put on the side, I don't think we'll succeed in our work to have a climate change position that would really help us face the dangers of climate. It will not work. Money will not be paid. And we have succeeded since the COP27 in having an agreement to compensate for the losses, and a certain figure has been announced. Nothing happened. Then 28, some progress in resolutions in literature, but no implementation. That is what will happen with the 29. And if there will be a 30th COP, because it depends on what the new American administration would do. We know the position of President Trump. So we are getting into a very difficult period, And I would suggest that we in the Nizami Janjaweed International Center, that we should not give time to talk about the noble goals. We have to be practical and talk about the difficulties we are meeting. We will have, it seems, new situations, buying lands, making war to acquire lands, annexing countries, sovereign countries, etc., etc. What are we going to do? What are we going to do? Those are the real questions that have to be addressed, with the hope that at a certain time, perhaps after artificial intelligence plays its role, that we would reach an equitable or effective system of global governance. Thank you.
Thank you, Amre. Just as you excuse yourself, you said you were going to put positive under circumstances. So you obviously included circumstances in your positivity. And that's why I wish you were more positive, but that's the way it is today, of course. Now, I'm not calling Madam President Calmy to be positive, but I'm just calling her to be the way we expect people from this experience, from this part of the world and country like Switzerland, is to give us most realistic, hoping they will be more positive than expected.
Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, our debate takes place in the context of the United Nations Pact for the Future. The Pact for the Future is the most comprehensive international agreement in decades. The pact reaffirms global commitment to the United Nations, the international system, and the principles of international law. And the question we are supposed to debate is how can we implement an equitable, effective global governance in today's context? I ask you, do you really think that it is possible? Do you really think that it will be possible to implement an inclusive, effective, and equitable governance in the frame of the international order, of the multilateral system we know today? I am sorry to be pessimistic, Mr. Chair. But fact is that the liberal order put in place after the Second World War is aggressed from all parts. We live in a world of global risk in which even the most powerful state cannot cope alone with pandemics, global warming, poverty, inequality, and conflicts. But the United Nations and the OSCE are outdated. The UN was created to protect the world from war, but today it seems powerless. Russia and the United States can veto any measure proposed by the Security Council. The UNRWA, the UN agency responsible for supporting Palestinian refugees, is under attack. And the UN Secretary General has been declared persona non grata in Israel. Multilateralism has run out of alternatives. The United Nations General Assembly has certainly increased the number of resolutions requiring only a majority of its members to pass. On September 18 last year, for example, it called for an end within 12 months to the Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. But symbolic decisions such as these, which the General Assembly is not capable of translating into action, make the United Nations look even more like an important institution. Today, the tendency to isolate and return to regional alliances outweighs the ability to generate common solutions. The latter clashes with the desire to expand national economic space or appropriate goods available elsewhere. With the fragmentation of the global economy, tensions between the major powers are on the rise, and the law of the strongest prevails. Attempts to strengthen national capabilities through exclusion have never brought national security. On the contrary, they have usually been the first signs of international conflict. We just spoke about sustainable environment, respect of climate conventions, but we have to acknowledge that it is difficult to achieve, for example, the goals of the climate change if conflicts prevail all over the world. We just learned that there is a ceasefire in Gaza. At least we hope so. But until now, we just have no political solution to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Many countries criticize the West for lecturing them on human rights and international law over Ukraine, while being very cautious now that Israel is massively violating rights in Gaza and in the West Bank. The response to the war in Ukraine showed the world at what can be done when a state violates its international obligations. Every instrument was used to mobilize international protection, sanction Moscow, grant asylum to refugees, and support the investigations of international justice. And this contrasts with the ways the same countries responded to the war in Gaza. A great deal of silence and little condemnation. It's clear that Western states regard international standards as a menu à la carte. Ladies and gentlemen, it was a time when we thought Vladimir Putin, the Russian president, was the most dangerous person in the world for aggressing Ukraine, violating its sovereignty and international law. But today, we have to acknowledge that Vladimir Putin is far from being isolated. Violations of international law are multiplying. I mentioned Ukraine, the Middle East, but listen to the threatening speeches of the American elected president. He asserts his country's expansionist ambitions. At a press conference, he refused to rule out using the army to side the Panama Canal, but also Greenland, a semi-autonomous territory belonging to Denmark since 1721 and part of NATO. Trump's statements on Panama and Greenland raise serious concern. Let's speak only about Europe and the example of Europe. There are also commentators that identify Donald Trump as the biggest political threat to Europe's defense. If it is unlikely that any US president will fully disengage from Europe, Donald Trump might reduce the size of the American contingent. If Washington were to find itself hard-pressed elsewhere, it would need to redeploy its troops away from Europe. It would be up to the Europeans to compensate. A defense spending target for NATO countries of 5% compared with the current 2% of GDP. Donald Trump's 5% target seems unrealistic, and this trend would leave Europe gravely underarmed and underdefended. The continent is increasingly vulnerable in the event of a major conflict. Europe is unprepared for war with Russia, and large part of the continent might not even be willing to fight. Because Europe is divided, a path to the east cannot be excluded for Austria, and is already not ruled out by countries like Hungary and Slovakia. This could signify a chaotic European policy regarding Russia. It even seems that dividing Europe is Donald Trump's and Elon Musk's preferred option, judging by the latter's efforts to support populist parties and movements such as Germany, AfD, or to criticize European governments that are guarantors of Ukraine, like Great Britain. A divided and weak Europe would thus be more dependent on the United States foreign and security policy. Ladies and gentlemen, under this condition, discussing the means of including effective and equitable global governance may be nice, but utopian. The international community has neither a strategy nor a plan for doing so. I'm sorry to be too pessimistic.
Thank you, Madam President. You started with referring to Pact for the Future, this historical document, the document that is actually signing and marking the era of epic transformation that we are entering in with or without our leadership. While the state of our world is very unstable. And I spoke before this with my dear friend Benita Ferrero-Waldner, and she said that she wanted to talk about young people, and I think that it's very good moment to talk about, especially because the Pact of the Future has one of the 5 parts of the Pact of the Future is devoted to youth and future generation, besides the fact that Pact of the Future was followed by 2 separate documents as a key documents. One is that about digital compact, another one is Declaration on Future Generations, which is actually showing very clearly that everyone understands that there's common understanding that without whatever we talk about the future, whatever topic we use, whatever challenge we take, we have to filter it through the eyes of the younger people. So without further notice, Benita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, dear moderator, dear Zlatko, Madam President, dear colleagues. Indeed, I have to say that unfortunately, I do agree with everything what Madam President, Amre, Moussa, and also Micheline said, because this is the reality. And I could also go on speaking about that because I feel the same. But I think the topic of today is to try to see how could we start implementing this positive Pact of the Future that has come about also in very, very complicated times. And indeed, the question is, what can we do? I think in the context of this equitable, inclusive, and effective global governance, we should not forget about our youth, meaningful youth engagement in policy making and decision making. Why? Because I think they are, as we always say, our future, but they are also, as we know, already our presence. And I think they should be there, and they should be an important part of the, as Amre also said, the civil society. Because since we see the difficulties and the challenges of today and the difficulties about leadership, I think we need a new impetus. We need an innovative action. And we know that in recent years, young people have become a driving force for societal change, pushing, for instance, for climate action. Think of Greta Thunberg, even if she was sometimes a pain in the neck, but I think she did something, promoting gender equality, demanding dignity for all, and driving innovative change, for instance, in business, in technology, in science. Think of artificial intelligence. However, and this is what I would like to mention, when it comes to participation in public policy making and decision making, youth remains almost invisible. Over the past 3 years, young people have repeatedly voiced their frustrations with arrangements to support youth participation in decision making at all levels. They want to be engaged throughout the whole decision making process, for instance, using the platforms and the networks to exert impact in the decision-making process. Thus, decision-making could be much more effective, I think, and would build again more trust in public institutions at a moment when the stakes for people and the planet have never been higher, and when social cohesion is indeed at the brink. Often young people are concerned about their future, of course, it's their future, and frequently show maybe a much greater willingness to think big, innovatively, and with a long-term perspective. I think it would also bring positive results against fake news, misinformation that was mentioned very, very clearly and rightly so. If they were involved in policymaking, first of all, they would have more information, and then they would also counter negative social media. And I think that would be something very, very important. Of course, the UN Common Agenda and extensive stakeholder consultations, they say there are 3 recommendations: expand and strengthen youth participation in decision-making at all levels, to make youth engagement also a requirement in all UN decision-making processes, and also support the establishment of a standing United Nations, so to say, youth town hall, and an integrated program from the UN system to facilitate greater diversity, representativeness, and preparedness in youth participation. For that, an important prerequisite is, of course, education. Only educated young people will be able to provide an interesting input on subjects, wherefore they should receive available, transparent information. They should be empowered about their rights, but they should also have to be aware about their responsibility, and they have to be serious about the consequences of their input. After the adoption of the World Programme of Action for Youth already in 1995, a number of governments have established mechanisms to facilitate a more structured participation of young people in decision-making. For instance, national action. There is a good example, the National Youth Council in Canada that has a consultative role to the Prime Minister on in non-partisan on issues of importance, including employment, access to education, strengthening communities, climate change, and clean growth. In my country, for instance, youth is particularly represented in NGOs, for instance, on rural questions, agriculture, on small and medium-sized enterprises, on development corporations, where they can already, where they are integrated and they can start to learn how to lobby also for their own interests. Then, of course, sometimes there are national youth parliaments, there are voluntary national reviews are getting more and more important. There is even the creation of an ombudsman for young people. There are some students that are working on education policy and so on. And there are even some informal political processes, young parliamentarians and young people in governments. But altogether in the whole world, only 2.6% of parliamentarians worldwide are below the age of 30. And among them, only 30% even are women. So I also refer to what Madam Tarja Halonen has said before. Now, also the UN organs want to do more and do more. Since the UN Conference on Environment and Development in 1992, member states called upon each country to support the promotion and creation of mechanisms to involve youth representation in all the UN processes. Since then, there was indeed a steady progress. Involvement of young people. And it's carried out through the major group of children and youth. And there is also the UN Youth Delegate Program. There are things like Economic and Social Council, the major group for children and youth is there. The Peace Building Commission has been particularly supportive. However, youth participation does not have any formal mechanism in the Security Council or in the subsidiary committees, neither in the Human Rights Council. And therefore, there is a lot still that has to be done. Even in the General Assembly, they now speak of funding a first UN Youth Office in the Secretariat. But it is not enough. I think we have to make a strong commitment to meaningful youth engagement in decision-making on local, on national, on regional, and on global levels. And I wanted to say even the European Union has very little still on the youth, but will do something. Now they consider at least to set up a consultative youth council to engage and integrate more the opinions and voices of young people, particularly importantly on climate change, the most important issue at this moment, gender equality and dignity for all, as well as questions of digitalization and innovation. But as I say, I think it would help a lot if we gave more voices to young people, because they could start rolling a process that is not so negative. Because as was said clearly, for the moment, leadership, unfortunately, is not really there. So we need new future leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Ferrero. And now we spoke intensively and last night about the path that is in front of us after COP29, because Azerbaijan is part of the Troika. There is also has a lot to do with implementation of COP29, especially, and about the next steps that are going to be expected in COP30. And we as the NGIC are going to be participate in our capacity as much as it is needed, and not only in implementation of COP29 successes, but also in preparation for the next step. So with that respect, I'm calling Ambassador Fuad Isgandarov, Ambassador of Azerbaijan to Switzerland, Liechtenstein, take the floor. Not limited to that, what I said, of course.
Okay, thank you very much, Madam President, Madam Commissioner, Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished guests. First of all, I would like to thank for kind invitation to this event. I'm really honored to be among the very well-known politicians with a great experience. I'm acting diplomat, and that's why my remarks will be mostly bureaucratic ones, technical ones. I'm not a politician. But before I will start, I would like to say that it's really difficult when you are the last one before the lunch. And secondary, when you are sitting just between three legendary, charming ladies politicians, Madam President of Latvia, I remember in the period of our beginning of our development in the middle of 2000s, I was an ambassador to the Netherlands in that moment. We really did feel the support of our Baltic countries, Baltic partners, especially Latvia in that period. I even remember that your ambassador to The Hague, to the Netherlands, was a very, energetic lady, and she always used the bicycle when she approached to some kind of reception, even Queen's reception. I said, why you don't use a car? And said, Fuad, be modest. I started to do the same. I didn't use my BMW 7. I used a bicycle as my colleague, ambassador of Latvia. On the left side, a former commissioner for neighborhood policy. I did serve in the European Union as ambassador of Azerbaijan for 9 years, from 2012 and 2021. And I remember your successors, Stefan and Johannes, your compatriot. I did work with them. Eastern Partnership project was a very great one. Unfortunately, we do not know anything about, no clue about this project anymore. Of course, with this war, it's not possible. But generally, I do think the main mistake was done in the period of 2016, when it was decided to divide 6 countries in 3 associated partners and 3 others. When you are dividing the project, it goes bad. That was I think I did say it clearly to our European partners. And of course, President of Switzerland, the country where I am serving now, and I would like to say something about this country as well, because it's a crucially important country, specifically in this period of time, and great experience to work with such kind of it seems a silent harbor, but trust me, now we need, in such a turbulence times, we need silent harbors more than Babylon towers. And before I will start with technical remarks, I would like just to respond to the issue of what Mr. Biden said in his farewell speech, about that rich oligarchs are coming to power. Okay, maybe it's a problematic issue, but generally, as a representative, of generation which did live in Soviet Union, which started as a country where the poor people came to power, and we saw how it ended. So imagine that, for example, poor people will be in power, which is the poorest country in the world, and Somalia pirates will be in power. And what? So to be rich or poor, it doesn't mean something specifically bad or good. But as a former citizen of Soviet Union, I know how it ended with my country when the oil and gas resources been exploited for the interests of others, but not for the people. And when COP29 happened, I remember there were so many questions about how it could happen in the country which was polluted too much. But who did pollute this country? Who spoiled this country from middle of the 19th century till now? We did it? No. It was done by the Russian Empire and then Soviet Empire. And where the poor people came to power, the first thing which they did, they occupied Azerbaijan, full of oil and resources, and then all the Southern Caucasus. We have pictures of the Red Army. It's the same as the Somalia pirates now. So that's a question to Mr. Biden about such kind of references. Concerning of course, I'm very proud that we managed to have a good success story in COP29. Our Minister of Ecology, good friend of mine for 30 years, the representative of my generation of managers in my country, Mr. Mukhtar Baba, said a lot about this issue, but generally I assess it as a real multilateral platform of the settlement of the issues which was underlined in the name of our panel. You know, there are three options for settlement of the problems, and not only conflicts, peace negotiations, wars, ecological problems, financial and others. The first one, which was provided and still providing successfully by our Swiss friends mostly, it is just bilateral negotiations with the support of good offices as our Swiss partners, which are providing for all over the world, all the partners all over the world. And I do think it is most effective one for the solution of the problems. Just to be absolutely clear, the first ever historical meeting direct without any moderators of Azerbaijani and Armenian ministers of foreign affairs happened here in October 2022. And it was just our Swiss friends just opened the doors, give us the floor. They provided very, very serious hospitality for both delegations and then left. And we talked 4 hours, first time ever, 4 from Azerbaijan, 4 from Armenia, and we started our peace negotiations. And now we have some kind of results. Among the 17 articles, 15 have been agreed. It started here in Geneva. And first ever direct negotiations between speakers of parliament also happened here in Geneva in the framework of IPU, International Parliamentarian Union. But again, it was just good offices. And that's why it's a bilateral track is crucial. And for the settlement of all the problems, not about speak not only about peace. The second option is with the moderating of some third partners. It's possible, but it doesn't work properly now. Because the people, the countries, and people, politicians, they don't have trust in third partners anymore. It happened in Qatar. That's why really it's a very good news. But it's very rare. Only, for example, in our case, when we did have a war for 30 years, we did have an OSCE Minsk group, which did nothing. And you know what the results of it? In 2020, the solution was military, and and that was when both sides lost thousands of people. And is it good option? Not always. It could be, but not always. That's why if we speak about the bilateral tracks, the best option is, of course, which our Swiss partners are providing for us. And I do hope that will be done in future as well. And the third option is the option of multilateral tracks. COP29, the best vision, best example of it, when so many countries gathered together, despite of the obstacles and circumstances, as Mr. Secretary General said, despite of circumstances, we managed to make it happen. 300 billion decision. It's something absolutely totally new in the COP history. I do hope it created a good basis for the future, and implementation of these results is crucial for not only for Azerbaijan, because the Azerbaijani presidency is ending in July this year, but next year our Brazilian friends will come to the solution of the problem. I do think that it's crucially important to use such kind of multilateral platforms as, for example, United Nations, OSCE, Council of Europe. There are so many. Arab League, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation, Non-Alignment Movement, for such kind of planetary solutions, because there is no any other platform. Yes, we can criticize, that now the system is not working properly, international system is not working properly, not responding appropriately to the new challenges, but we do not have anything else. What we can have? By the way, in case of our Swiss partner, they faced with a serious criticism. They became the member of United Nations Security Council, and how they can be neutral in this position. They can't always, vote abstain. They should vote for something. And if they're voting for something in Security Council, it means they can lose the neutrality. And in some cases, they took the position concerning some conflicts and wars. And that's why they're also facing with some challenges. But generally, I think from all the three options are working now. One is better, another one not. But what is the most important thing in this particular case is trust. Let's be frankly with each other. When we are working with, for example, with our partners, which are neutral generally, but neutrality, please do not mix it with a non-alignment. Neutrality is something specific. When you're neutral, you are not biased. For example, in case of OSCE Minsk group, we did have three co-chairs, Russia, United States, and France. And now they've always been in contradiction with each other. How we can find a solution of our problems with Armenia when our co-chairs were in contradictions, in conflict with each other? So, but in case of the countries which are providing good offices, for example, Switzerland, I am really thankful to our Swiss government, Swiss Federal Department of Foreign Affairs, for real support of this peace process between Azerbaijan and Armenia. There were 8 attempts in parliamentarian attempts in parliaments in different canton, federal parliament. It was a very biased approach to support one side of this war. Of course, not Azerbaijan, but they've been always rejected by the government, because if you speak, for example, in the last case, if you speak about the displaced persons of Armenian roots, of course, you should speak about the million of refugees and displaced persons of Azerbaijanis. But if you speak only about them, you are biased. And of course, if the government will accept such kind of approach, it could not be any more neutral or a neutral broker, trustful broker for our peace negotiations. What I want to say, so in case of this, we see 3 options, and of course the role of such kind of the organization as Nizami Gencevi Center is crucial. I call it the name of treasure trove or experience for new generations of the conflict and problems solvers. And thank you very much. Trust me, second time I'm participating in this event. I'm always very sensitive to all the elements of our discussions, of your discussions. Your experience is crucially important for such period of turbulences which we are facing now. And I do think that it will be great impact, as it happened in COP29, by the way. I know how our friends from the center did help us, Azerbaijan, to make this story successful. And I do think that it's not a last assistance on the global level from your center to all the suffering countries. Thank you very much, and I wish you all the best in new year. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Now I open the floor for your comments, reflections, questions on the topic and on what we heard so far. Daria.
So this is not exactly for the global governance, but it is very much what was just mentioned about, and thanks for the Swiss government. I have nothing against that, Amre, my good friend Michelle. But years ago, years ago when I learned to know Azerbaijan and Armenia. That was the reason because of the Minsk process. Finland was with the USA and France and what else we were there in Minsk process. We made it for the years and it's never made a success. So is it already now a long time ago? Could you say briefly what is your opinion? Why we never made any success? Is it because of the members of the board so that they were always worried about their own how can I say, benefits, not concerning Finland either, but more because we hadn't any role on that. We were in the position like Switzerland or Austria. And so, I mean, helpful, but not very important. And so, what's your opinion afterwards concerning the Minsk? Thank you.
First of all, thank you for your question, Madam President. By the way, I would like to say that Finland was very active in this case, and I remember my meeting with your representative he was a representative of EU for Southern Caucasus, and we talked a lot about it during my visit to Helsinki in 2012. No, in 2003, I'm sorry, in 2003. And concerning the Minsk group is a little bit different than co-chairs of Minsk group, because Minsk group is another 12 countries, but the co-chairs of Minsk group, they monopolize all the activity of Minsk group. That's a problem, because they were the members of Security Council, permanent members of Security Council, Russia, France, and United States. First of all, why it was not successful, it could not be successful from the very beginning, because they were totally, in contradiction with each other. Even France and United States, they were different players. It's not a story about only Russia and two other countries. Secondly, these three countries were the most serious, biggest Armenian diasporas located. Of course, they were under the pressure of Armenians, and that's why we have never seen a very, the non-biased approach of all three countries. For example, in case of one of them, was really neutral, trying to support, but generally others were in other positions. That's why that's the second option why we didn't find. And the last, but not least, of course, we did have, it was some first platform of peace regulation in OSCE. Unfortunately, it was not successful. All other peace processes were under the responsibility of United Nations. Unfortunately, for example, in Southern Caucasus, in case of Georgia, it was ended with a loss of Abkhazia and Ossetia. In our case, no, it didn't happen. But why it didn't happen? Because in one moment we understood that no, it doesn't work. When from the very beginning, from 1994, when we started this, in 1993 generally, when we started these negotiations, we understood that there is a split between Nagorno-Karabakh and Armenia was representing the interests of the country, of Armenian population. But when Mr. Pashinyan said Karabakh is Armenia, it was the end of the story, because okay, if it's a real occupation. That's why our response was very tough, but resulted. Now we have a totally new situation. I do think that we're very close to the peace, but we need something to do. Both countries have some homework to do, and we're very thankful to our friends all over the world, specifically to Nizami Gencevi Center politicians, to hear from them their advices, their vision of the situation. You know how sensitive is my president to your advices. You know about it. I know how friendly he is with the Nizami Gencevi Center's politicians, and that's why we do hope that your advices also will be helpful in our solution of the problem. I'm not optimistic concerning the final results as soon as possible, but I'm optimistic in general way. Just if we speak about the 2025 as a something which is when everything will go from bad to worse, it's one story. But if we speak about the possibility to resettle the situation, one success story is visible. The peace is just nearby in few steps. We can speak about the conflict in the Middle East, Ukrainian war, or others. But in this particular case, the peace is just nearby. The war is over. So if we need success story as examples, it's here. Help us to reach it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I apologize to interrupt the next step, but I will only say that why I made this question. I know that some of you have been also involved in this case, and I think very seriously that United Nations should give possible for the researches in this kind of the peace process, not only for those who have made a success, but those which have failed. And I have hope that University of UN in Costa Rica or somebody else could make work in that way, that we could know that what might be the reasons for the successes or failures. And so that's why I say very honestly that I was a foreign minister from my country from 95 to 2000, and then in time what you mentioned, I was the president of the country. So there can be also another explanations for this, but I think personally that the fact that both Armenia and Azerbaijan would get also something extra benefit trying to keep at least for temporary peace. So it might be helpful, but that's it. We can continue with the coffee and so.
I have three registered participants, just Shaba, Anna, and Rosen. So could you proceed in that order without further calling you?
Thank you. Very interesting discussion. Thank you much indeed for all the speakers in the panel. Let me offer some reactions of mine to the notions you have suggested on the pact for the future. In my understanding, according to my humble experience in the UN and in leading some of the processes in the UN, it is not a program of implementation. It is not a program of implementation. It is a beautiful document of beautiful ideas, beautiful objectives, but it is still far away from being something to be implemented as we speak. Even if it is broken down into 50 plus actions, what we call actions, these actions are not real actions. Just read it. These are repetitions of some very nice ideas, what we have said already many, many times. It will become action, and it will become a global program for all of us if there's a roadmap for each and every objective, if there is a budget for each and every so-called action, and if there is a negotiation process, if and when necessary, how to make it happen. A second notion, I hear many, many times the dichotomy between North and South. And I agree to a very large extent. For decades, it has been a case that the existing legal and institutional network has been dominated from the very birth by the political North, and was less benefiting for the political South. But let's make a little bit deeper dive. It is not the case today. Why do you think the US wants to step out of this multilateral system or parts of this multilateral system? Because it doesn't work for the benefit of some of those countries who create it. It started benefiting some other countries who are very powerful coming up and basically using or sometimes misusing the existing system. So if we stick to this north against south, south against north, we miss a very important trend that is characteristic now in the world. The third, on the UN reform, which was mentioned here, I fully agree that it is a very, very difficult business to change the charter because it has been created in order not to be able to be changed. But without charter change, there will be no real UN reform that would cater for the 21st century. Now we have, if I would compare it with the parliaments, we have a single chamber parliament in the UN, and we are lamenting how to bring it science, business, use, and others. Why aren't we a little bit more imaginative, using different chambers and how to structure those chambers with each other? So it will require a rethinking of the model, how we take decisions in the United Nations. And last but not least, let's not be naive. UN has never been the prime and principal platform of decision-making for the most burning issues, including the Security Council. The big decisions have always been taken somewhere out there, mostly on bilateral or some other more than bilateral platforms. And once the decisions were made, they were taken into the UN to discuss and rubber stamp. The problem today is that some of those platforms that used to take decisions on very harsh issues don't exist or don't work. So one issue is we try to import everything into the UN, but it will lead to some kind of frustration. Or we try to think which are those platforms which could be reinvigorated or rethought. Thank you much.
There are many comments that your intervention suggests. I will just sum them up in three elements. I think that last year or the last 18 months in Baku, so in Azerbaijan, show successes hardly won. It hasn't been easy for Azerbaijan, for your government in the COP, and you have highlighted, I could give other examples, but you have highlighted, I think, that the two very different but very important showcases have been COP and the negotiations on Nagorno-Karabakh. And I must confess that I'm part of those that have been involved and have been physically in Nagorno-Karabakh, and I think it's the Lashin corridor or in there, plus Baku, plus of course Armenia. I think that this goes back to what Vike-Freiberga has highlighted, perceptions, how you create public opinion, and how Benita and Amre Moussa and your very interesting remarks, this role of young people and in creating public opinion. I think that in analyzing what's going on in the world, we have to bring this, that it's not easy, that certain issues that are entrenched in certain preconceived ideas, and of course in COP29, we had a preconceived idea against this. I was told by someone, you put the fox in charge of the hen house. This is a disaster. But the same thing, there were a lot of preconceived idea of what really is the matter in Nagorno-Karabakh, in this peace negotiation. And allow me to conclude by the importance of these meetings. I think that the first step is to know and to discuss in order to be able to speak, to speak not on behalf, because you don't need speaking on behalf of you, but in dispelling certain preconceived ideas. So thank you for your interventions. I have another, but maybe in another of the panels on youth. We speak a lot of youth, but the last fact today is that the world is graying. So why? I go back to Vike-Freiberga. Why suddenly we discover that, and the mantra is that the world is gray? As I say, we'll pose the question in another of the panels.
Mr. Chairman, I listened very carefully to the speech of His Excellency, the Ambassador of Azerbaijan. I was very impressed. I learned a lot. I want to thank you for sharing the three options and that they all lead to the very simple trust. If there is trust, we have something. If there is no trust, we have nothing. So here, I want to share a very simple fact with you. During the first presidency of President Trump, he documented, lied 30,573 times. So basically, documented by all the international media, he was lying 21 times per day. That's true. So speaking about trust, and there was a lot of comments, Washington Post, Toronto Star, is this a lie? Is this a misleading information? Is this, is this that? Is it intentional? It's not intentional. There is a court decision that says he was lying 30,573 times for 4 years. So my very simple question is, okay, that's number one mandate. Number two is coming next Monday. He said and repeated 1,000 times, I'm gonna solve the Ukraine war, not conflict, the war, the bloody war in Ukraine within a day. Then he said, I'm gonna solve it in the first day. It's coming next Monday, dear friends.
Within first 100 is the latest iteration.
So next Monday, we're going to have the war in Ukraine solved. Hey, that's a great peacemaker. So that's why I'm just, the bad news I already distributed to you. But the good news is he's not going to have 4 years. He's going to have just 2 years, believe me, 2 years. Because the midterm elections in the United States can bring, and I believe American institutions, American civil society, as Trump has made a very strong friendships, he also made very strong enemies. And they're going to mobilize. So 2 more years to go, and let's count the lies coming. Thank you.
Thank you, Rosen. Before closing, I would ask Madam President Vike-Freiberga to wrap up on behalf of people who are introducing us to the topic.
Ladies and gentlemen, I think some of us have been more provocative than others in trying to elicit your responses and your positive solutions. Clearly, as a former scientist, I am, as it were, consoled by the thought that natural processes tend to, for some reason, to take the shape of sigmoid waves. In other words, you have a process that keeps, if you like, if you have a measurement of it, it keeps rising, it keeps increasing, then it reaches an asymptote, and once it has reached an asymptote, it starts going down again. Then it reaches a bottom level, and having reached the bottom level, believe it or not, the process starts to grow again. And this is a curious phenomenon, but it gives us hope in the sense that if you look in human history, things have gone in cycles. There have been dark ages and periods of violent and brutal conflict and misery and volcanic eruptions that created several years of volcanic ash winter and famine worldwide, etc., etc. And then again, things pick up. And well, of course, our planet keeps circling around the sun and has seasons, at least in many in the temperate parts of the world, there are changes in seasons. So of course, the conclusion of if anything is going to the dogs, if we see in public space and public debate increasingly misinformed narratives, deliberate lies, deliberate efforts to make things worse rather than better, then we have no choice but to do our best to counteract. To every force there's an equal, I mean, Newtonian physics has not disappeared because of quantum physics. To each force there's an equal and opposite counterforce. So if we see lies and disinformation and destruction and injustice prevail, we do have to put in more effort to counteract it. If we see hatred being fostered, then we have to engage in dialogue. If we see injustice, we have to try and rectify it. And this is why in Nizami Ganjavi, we keep coming together. And even as we, if you like, notice the diagnosis about the state of the world, which is far from what we would desire it to see, we cannot give up, obviously. It only means that we have to prevail, and we have to work harder, and we have to put up with it. But we have to also have our eyes open and not have illusions.
Thank you, President. In conclusion, it looks like what should be done, as some of you were pointing out, most of you are pointing out, I mean, they are from the Pact of the Future documents and the documents of COP29, documents of the Summit of the Future, and a lot of other things are very clear in what should be done and even how it should be done. The problem, one of the greatest success of COP was, let's say, tripling the commitment for the fund from 100 to 300, which is a great achievement. But just to give you an example, I think that I'm coming to the conclusion, I think it's more than evident, that it's no more about what should be done. It's not even about the question of money. It's the question of political will to do what is agreed that should be done and how should be done. So it's a question of political will. The money exists, the resources exist. The question is only, will we do it accordingly? As Shaba was saying, of course, the Pact for the Future is not the operational program. It is a collection of a lot of goals, as SG said in our last meeting, it's a turbocharger for SDGs implementation. Just to give you an example about Pact of the Future, 3 weeks ago, the UN adopted the budget, annual budget for 2025. We were very frustrated as SG when he was telling us about the fears, what the next year, financial year will look like. Just to give you the idea, the budget for this year, 2025, is surprisingly 0.3% bigger, but bigger than 2024. It started that no one single person should be hired more than the one that was in previous year, with the question what should be scaled down. So on the end, the budget that was adopted is a little bit bigger than the budget of the previous year. Of course, there were some countries who, let's say, said very clearly, it's not any big country. I mean, it's not any of P5 countries, but I'll quote you, the one representative said that his country is out of consensus. They don't like it because they want to act in their own interest, and they will not interested in they're against anything that is financing the Pact for the Future and anything that is financing SDG Agenda 2030, because that should be given to the countries individually. I'm just giving you example. Of course, that's very minor opinion, but very serious country expressed that in a way how they see the multilateralism in overall speaking. Now, the last point, those top individuals, just to give you an example, the wealth of 3 top individuals in this year was bigger than previous year for 85 years of UN budget for this year. Okay? Yeah, he's not among them. He's, you know, he's a poor guy among the top guys. So the three top individuals this year, they are richer for 85 years of UN budget. Obviously, it's not a question of money, it's a question of political will. And political will is that we go for lunch.
Everyone has like, giving some lunchtime to watch the video with